There is a version of my life where none of this happened.
Where I walked out of that clinic, drove home in my sensible car, ate the soup I had already planned for dinner, and went to bed early because I had a prenatal vitamin routine and a 7 a.m. alarm and a life that made perfect rational sense. I had a plan. I had always had a plan. That was the thing about me that people either loved or found quietly exhausting. I did not drift. I decided. I executed. I moved forward with a kind of fierce, deliberate calm that had gotten me through nursing school, through my mother's illness, through the end of the relationship I thought was going to be the rest of my life. I decided I wanted a baby, on my own, on my timeline, with no one's permission and no one's interference. I researched clinics, I researched donors, I read every form, every disclosure, every clause of every document they handed me until I understood it completely. I did everything right. I did everything right. And still, somehow, I ended up sitting across a table from the most dangerous man in New York City while he slid a contract toward me with hands that could have crushed stone and waited for me to sign my life into his. What I did not know, what no sane woman filling out clinical intake forms at a reputable fertility clinic would ever think to check, was whether the anonymous donor sample they had assigned to my file belonged to the head of the most feared organized crime dynasty in the northeastern United States. That oversight cost me everything I thought I knew about my life. And somehow, impossibly, illogically, in a way I could not have predicted and cannot fully explain even now, it gave me the only thing I never knew I needed. The mistake that started everything. It was a Tuesday. I know that because I had just made coffee, the good kind with the stovetop pot my mother left me, and I was still in my robe, and the morning light was doing that thing it does in October, in a New York apartment where it comes in sideways and turns everything gold. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and I looked at that test for a long time. 2 lines, 2 unmistakable, definitive, beautiful lines. I cried. Not because I was sad, not because I was afraid. I cried the way you cry when something you wanted so badly for so long finally becomes real, and your body doesn't know what to do with the weight of it. I called Vivian. It was 6:45 in the morning. I said 2 words. It worked. She arrived in 17 minutes with champagne she couldn't drink because I couldn't drink it, and orange juice as a consolation prize, and we sat on my kitchen floor in our pajamas and talked about names until noon. I was happy. Completely, uncomplicated, fully happy. That was Tuesday. Friday changed everything. The woman on the phone identified herself as the clinic's patient liaison. Her voice had a specific quality, the way a doctor's voice sounds when they have rehearsed what they are about to say multiple times and still don't feel ready to say it. She said there had been an administrative irregularity. She said they needed me to come in, today, as soon as possible. She said it wasn't a medical emergency. The pregnancy was fine. The tests were all normal. But there was a matter that required immediate in-person discussion. I said, because I am a nurse, and because I have sat on the other side of enough of these conversations to know what they really mean, I said, what kind of irregularity? She said, the kind we need to explain in person. The director was a man I had met twice. Professional, reassuring, very good at his job. When I walked into his office that afternoon, he looked like a man sitting on top of something he had been dreading since the moment it happened. He explained carefully that a labeling error had occurred in their sample processing and assignment workflow, that the sample coded to my file had been, incorrectly, not the anonymous donor I had selected. I sat very still while he spoke. I am very good at sitting still when I'm absorbing something catastrophic. It's a nurse skill. You learn to hold your face while your mind runs very fast in the opposite direction. He slid a sealed folder across the desk. Inside, a single printed page, a name, Dante Caruso. And underneath it, a business card, heavy cream stock, no logo, just the name again, in embossed letters and a phone number. I turned it over. On the back, handwritten in ink the color of dried blood, a single line. We need to meet. Come alone. Tonight. Or I come to you. Times. He already knew. Before me. He had been notified before me. Which meant he had already decided what to do about it. Which meant I was not walking into a negotiation. I was walking into something he had already finished planning. The man behind the name. Vivian typed his name into the search bar with the kind of confidence people have before they find out they should not have done that. The results populated immediately. Federal investigation, acquitted. Federal investigation, charges dropped. Rival family shooting, 4 dead, case closed. Empire value estimated at $4 billion, distributed across real estate, hospitality, and shell corporations that the financial press could trace and the federal government apparently could not. Then the photographs. Dante Caruso, outside a Manhattan federal courthouse. Charcoal suit, no tie, stone expression. Behind him, 2 men who were clearly not associates. They were soldiers, and the body language made that unmistakable. Beside him, a legal team that cost more per hour than most people made in a month. He looked like a man who had never once doubted that he would walk out of that building. He also looked, and I resented this detail immediately, like a man who had been architected by someone with an agenda. There was a precision to the way he existed in the frame of that photograph that should not have been possible for a crime boss outside a federal courthouse. Vivian closed the laptop. She said, "Ellie, you need to run." I said, "I'm pregnant. Where exactly am I running to?" She said, "Canada. You run to Canada." I said, "That's not a real plan, Viv." She said, "It's a better plan than going to dinner with a man who makes federal investigations disappear like he's cancelling magazine subscriptions." She was not wrong. I went anyway. He did not stand when I walked in. He did not smile. He did not say anything for long enough that the silence became its own kind of language, one that said, "I know you're afraid and I'm not going to pretend otherwise, and I have been at this table long enough that you arriving is simply the next item on an agenda I already wrote." I sat down across from him. He didn't apologize. He didn't offer condolences or awkward warmth or any of the social scaffolding that normal human beings use to cushion an abnormal situation. He just looked at me across that table like I was a problem he was already 3 steps ahead of solving, and he was waiting to see if I had figured that out yet. I had. I just didn't plan to let him know. He confirmed the mix-up. His lawyers had already reviewed the clinic's liability exposure, which was apparently considerable, and which he had apparently elected not to pursue because it served his purposes to keep the situation quiet. He confirmed paternity. DNA confirmation had been run before he contacted the clinic. Of course it had. He told me, without inflection, without apology, as if he were reading from a memo he had already approved, that he would not permit his biological child to be raised outside the family structure, that the Caruso name carried obligations, that those obligations extended to the child regardless of how the child had come to exist. Then he slid the contract across the table. Marriage. 1 year minimum, full financial provision for me and the child. Non-disclosure agreement, residence in the Caruso property on 5th Avenue, weekly medical care, a security detail at all times, his world, his rules. I read every word. Then I slid it back. I said, "I'm not for sale." Something crossed his face. Not offense. Closer to recalibration. He said, "I'm not buying you, Miss Marin. I'm protecting what's mine." I stood up. I picked up my coat. I looked at him once more. That composed, unreadable face, those hands still folded on the table as if nothing I did could surprise him. And I walked out. The night air hit me on the sidewalk and I breathed it in like a woman who had just escaped something, which was exactly what I had done, which was exactly what I needed to believe for the next 30 seconds. Then the black SUVs pulled up, 2 of them, moving slowly alongside me, patient. The way predators are patient. The window on the nearest one rolled down. A man leaned out, younger than Dante, looser in his posture, with a smile that had learned all the right movements without understanding any of the right reasons. He said, "My brother asked nicely. I won't." He opened the door. I looked at it. I thought about Vivian's Canada plan. Then I got in the car. Into the Empire. My apartment was secured, according to the 3-sentence explanation Dante provided. I asked what that meant. He said it meant it was no longer accessible. I asked if my things were still in it. He said they had been moved. He said this the way you say the weather forecast. Just information, delivered, complete. My life had been packed into boxes and relocated while I was in a car between his restaurant and his building. And the man responsible for this was eating breakfast on a terrace 12 floors above the city and reading documents that were probably more important to him than anything I was currently feeling. I had a floor to myself. Bedroom, sitting room, private bathroom, a kitchen that connected to the main level. Everything in it was beautiful. Everything in it was selected by someone else. There were no personal items, no photographs, no accumulated evidence of a life lived by a specific person. It looked like a very expensive hotel room that had given up trying to feel like a home. I sat on the edge of the bed and I put my hand on my stomach. I said quietly, "I'm going to figure this out. I promise." The baby, at that point, was not yet kicking, but I felt something. A settling, a heaviness, a reminder that I was not here for myself anymore. I was here because of this, because of the life I had chosen and the situation it had become, and the man 3 floors above me who believed that both of those things were now his concern. I unpacked the bag I had been allowed to bring. I put my mother's photograph on the nightstand. Then I went to find out what the rules were. He delivered the rules over coffee he had not offered to share, standing at the kitchen island with the kind of controlled precision that I would come to understand was less a personality trait than a survival mechanism. A man who had learned to remove all variables from every situation because variables were the things that killed people. No contact with the clinic. His legal team was managing it. No discussion of his business. Ever. Public appearances as his wife would begin within 72 hours. A stylist would arrive tomorrow. She would see a doctor weekly, his doctor, at his clinic. I listened to every rule with the same still face I had used the day before. And when he finished, I asked the only question that mattered. I said, "What happens when the year is up?" He set down his coffee cup. He looked at me. Then he said 4 words that were more frightening than the contract, more frightening than the SUVs, more frightening than anything he had said in that restaurant. He said, "We'll discuss that when we get there." He didn't answer. The non-answer was the answer. It meant the rules could change. It meant he hadn't decided yet. It meant I was the variable, the unmeasured, unsettled, unknown element in a life that had been organized around the elimination of unknown elements. I was the thing he hadn't calculated for. I was not sure yet whether that was dangerous or whether it was the only leverage I had, possibly both. She arrived without calling first. I would later learn that Rosa Caruso had never called first in her life because she had never once needed to. The world arranged itself around her schedule, and the people in it either learned to be ready or learned to be surprised. She was 74 years old. Small, sharp in the way that blades are sharp. Not jagged, not rough, but honed by decades of use into something that could cut without effort. She wore black because she had worn black for most of her adult life, and at this point, it was less a color than a statement. She walked in. She looked at Dante. She looked at me. And then she crossed the room and she took my hands in both of hers before Dante could say a word. She said to him, "She has good eyes, honest eyes. You've never had honest eyes near you." He said, "Nonna, don't." Then she leaned in close and whispered, quietly enough that Dante could not hear, close enough that I could see the absolute certainty in her face. She said, "He's not what he shows you. Be patient." I held onto those words that night like a person holds onto something in the dark, not because they're certain it will hold, but because it's the only thing within reach. He's not what he shows you. I stood in the hallway outside his office that evening, not planning to listen, when the voice on the other side of the door said something that pulled the floor out from under me. If Reyes finds out about the woman and the baby, they'll use her. I stepped back into the dark. I stood very still. I was not just a contract wife, I was a target. The public performance. The dress was black. Of course it was black. It was impeccably cut, and had probably cost more than 3 months of my former rent, and I wore it the way I wear scrubs on a difficult shift, with the full awareness that the uniform matters and the person inside it is what the uniform is protecting. Dante arrived at my door at 7:45. He looked at me with the assessing clinical gaze of a man confirming that all the components were in order. Then he said, "You look appropriate." I decided to take that as a compliment. The gala was everything I expected and nothing I could have prepared for. Senators and billionaires and the kind of ambient power that exists in rooms like this. The way humidity exists in certain climates, pressing against your skin from all sides and reminding you that you are not the weather. I stood beside Dante, and I smiled at the people he introduced me to, and I answered questions about how we met with the story his team had prepared. A mutual connection, a private dinner, nothing that invited follow-up questions. And then a woman found me near the bar, 50s, silver hair. The posture of someone who had stopped apologizing for how much space she took up at least 2 decades ago. She spoke to me like a real person, not like a Caruso accessory, not like a wife to be assessed, like a person. Her name was Catherine. She asked me what I did. I told her I was a fertility nurse. Her face changed, a warmth, a personal recognition, and for 20 minutes we talked about the work, about the patients, about what it means to be in a room with people at the most fragile moment of their hope. By the time we separated, she had pressed her card into my hand and made me promise to call. I found Dante again near the back of the room. He was watching me with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not assessing, not calculating. Something quieter, something slower. Authenticity in a room full of performance is the most dangerous thing in the world. It moves like something real in a space where nothing is, and people reach for it before they remember to check whether it's safe. I didn't know Dante Caruso was one of those people. Not yet. We rode for 6 blocks without speaking. Then he said, "You didn't need coaching. I kept my eyes on the city." I said, "I work with frightened people every day. A room full of powerful ones isn't that different." He considered that for a moment. Then, in the tone of a man asking a question he actually wants the answer to for the first time in a very long while, he said, "What frightens you, Miss Marin?" I should have said something measured, something appropriate, something that kept the wall between us at the height we had both agreed it should be. Instead, I told the truth, because I was tired and the city was beautiful, and the thing I had been feeling all evening had gotten too heavy to carry and lie about simultaneously. I said, "Right now, the fact that I'm starting to think you might actually be a decent person, that terrifies me more than the dangerous one." He didn't speak, but he didn't look away. For the rest of the drive, he kept his eyes on me with an expression I didn't have a name for yet, one that I would spend the next several weeks trying not to think about. I went to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed and breathed for a while. Then I pulled back the duvet to get in and found something on my pillow. A photograph, printed on plain paper. Me, from that morning in my coat, at the corner near my old apartment building. Not taken by Dante's men. The angle was wrong. The focal length was wrong. There was something about the quality of it that felt different. Someone had been watching me. Someone who was not Dante. Someone who had no reason to be watching me unless they already knew who I was and why I mattered. I sat there holding that photograph for a long time. Then I went to find him. The first protection. He looked at the photograph for 3 seconds. Then he picked up his phone and made 2 calls in Italian I didn't understand. And within the next 40 minutes, the penthouse had been locked down in a way I could feel even from my floor. The distant sound of movement, the shift in the ambient tension, the way the 2 guards at the elevator became 4. I sat at the kitchen island and I waited. He came back. He sat down across from me. Not standing, not looming, actually across from me, in the way that human beings sit across from each other when they intend to have a conversation. And he told me about Victor Reyes. Not everything. Not the history, not the depth, not the full weight of what that name meant in the geography of his world, but enough. Enough for me to understand that I was not a random target. Enough for me to understand that the baby made me a specific, strategic kind of vulnerable. A Caruso heir, biologically, legally, undeniably, was leverage. Alive, the baby was collateral. The mother was the delivery mechanism. I listened to all of this with my hands folded on the table. When he finished, he said, "I should have told you sooner." I said, "You think?" Something shifted at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, the architectural possibility of one. It was the first honest exchange we'd had. It happened at 7:45. I was sitting on the couch reading, actually reading for the first time in weeks, and the baby moved in a way that was different from the ambient movement I had felt for the past few days. This was decisive, intentional, a kick, unmistakable, oriented, completely present. I went completely still, Dante was across the room. He looked up from his documents when I stopped moving. I looked at him. I am not sure why I did. There was no reason to look at him. He was not the person I would have chosen for this moment in any version of the life I had planned. He was, objectively, the wrong person for this moment. He was also the only person in the room. I said, "Do you want to—" I didn't finish the sentence. He was already crossing the room. He knelt in front of me and put his hand on my stomach with a gentleness that was completely inconsistent with every other way I had ever seen him move in the world. And the baby kicked again, hard and clear, directly into his palm. Something broke open in his face. I watched it happen in real time, the fracturing of the expression he wore everywhere, the dissolution of the composure that I had come to think of as structural, something he had been born with rather than built. For one unguarded, irrevocable second, I saw who Dante Caruso was underneath everything he had constructed to protect himself from exactly this. A man who wanted to love something and had spent 15 years convincing himself he couldn't afford to. He schooled his expression, put the walls back up, pulled his hand away slowly. Neither of us spoke. In the hallway, unnoticed, a phone screen lit up. Marco had been watching from the doorway. His expression was unreadable, not warm, not cold, something in between that was somehow worse than either. He typed a single message and sent it before he turned away. The screen read, "It's happening faster than we thought. Trust built in fire." The prenatal appointments had become the one part of my week I could control. My time, my body, my conversation with my doctor. The only corner of my existence that still felt like something I had chosen. I was 2 blocks from the clinic when the van pulled up. There were 3 of them, Reyes's men. I know that now. I didn't know it then. What I knew then was the van, the speed, the chemical cloth, the guard who had been behind me and suddenly wasn't, because someone had put him on the ground. I ran. I am not a runner. I am a pregnant woman in her 2nd trimester in ankle boots and a wool coat on a Manhattan sidewalk in October. And I ran with everything I had, which was more than I expected, because when the thing you are running toward is your unborn child's safety, the body finds reserves it did not know it had. 4 blocks. I made it 4 blocks before I heard the engine behind me again. And then a black car screeched to a stop at the curb. The door flew open from the inside, and Dante Caruso leaned across the passenger seat with an expression on his face that I had never seen before. Not calm, not controlled, not 3 steps ahead. Afraid. He was afraid. I got in. I got. He drove. Fast, clean lines through traffic. One hand on the wheel, the other white-knuckled against his thigh. I shook. The baby moved in agitated circles. 6 blocks of silence. Then he said, "Are you hurt?" I said, "No." He said, "The baby." I said, kicking furiously. A pause that did something to the air in the car. Then he said one word, "Good." He came himself. Not a guard, not a driver, not a convoy of security he could have dispatched from the building while remaining at his desk with his documents. Him, personally. Actions say what words refuse to, and Dante Caruso's actions were starting to say something his mouth had not yet decided to admit. I couldn't sleep. Adrenaline takes a long time to leave the body, and the mind has its own schedule for processing close calls, and I had spent most of the previous hours lying in the dark rehearsing the 4 blocks I'd run, and the faces of the men in the van, and the look on Dante's face when I got in the car. I got up, poured water, stood at the window for a while watching the city do what it does at 3 in the morning, which is exist without apology in the way only New York can. When I turned back toward my door, I saw him. He was in the chair outside my bedroom, asleep. Shoulder pressed against the wall, head tilted back at an angle that would give any normal person a terrible neckache. Still dressed from the day, with the particular stillness of someone who had not intended to fall asleep but had lost the argument with exhaustion. He had not gone to his own floor. He had not gone to his office. He had pulled a chair from the hallway table and sat down outside my door. And at some point between then and 3 in the morning, he had closed his eyes. I stood in the doorway and I looked at him for a long time. This terrifying, impossible, infuriating man, who drove himself 4 blocks through Manhattan traffic to a sidewalk where his own guard had been taken down, who sat outside my door until his body gave out. Something shifted in my chest, irrevocably. The kind of shift you feel happening in real time and know, even as it happens, that it cannot be undone. I went back to bed. I left him there. In the morning he was gone. Back to his floor, back to his documents, back to the version of himself that did not sit in hallway chairs. But on my nightstand, beside his new security protocol, was a white rose. No note, just the flower. I found Rosa an hour later and showed it to her. Her face did something complicated. Then she went very still in the way she went still when something mattered. She said, "A white rose. In our family. Since his grandfather's time. It is a symbol of protection, of claiming someone as blood." She looked at me. "He has never given one to anyone outside the family." She paused. "Not once. Not ever." Lines crossed. The building lost power at 9:47. It came back in 90 seconds. The generators were efficient, as everything in this building was efficient. But in those 90 seconds, the penthouse went dark, in the way that spaces only go dark when every light source fails simultaneously. And in that darkness, I navigated by memory toward the kitchen, where I knew there was a flashlight in the third drawer from the left, because I had catalogued every drawer in this kitchen, out of the instinct of a woman who likes to know her exits. His hand closed around the flashlight at the same moment mine did. Neither of us pulled away. In the dark, genuinely dark, the city lights filtered through glass, the only ambient source. We stood in a kitchen that was not mine, with our hands overlapping on the same object, and neither of us found a reason to move. The emergency lights came back, softer than normal, red-tinted. We were very close. We talked, really talked for the first time. Not negotiation, not rules, not information delivered across a power differential. Just two people in a half-dark kitchen at the end of a hard week, and the specific honesty that only happens when the lights go out. I told him about Daniel, my fiancé, the man I had planned a future with, who looked at the future I wanted, the specific, particular future that included a child on my own terms, and found it incompatible with his, who had left not cruelly but completely, which was in some ways worse. I told him that the IVF hadn't been defeat, it had been reclamation. He listened to all of this without speaking, without checking his phone, without looking anywhere except at me. Then he told me something, quietly, once, in the tone of a man reading words out loud from a document he has kept sealed for a very long time. He said, "My first wife did not die in a car accident. She was killed. Reyes ordered it. She was 3 months pregnant. The kitchen was very quiet." He said, "That is why the child matters so much." I said nothing for a moment. Then I said, "I understand." He looked at me. Something in his face moved. He said, "That's why you matter." He stopped, as if he hadn't meant to say that last part, as if it had arrived before he could intercept it. I reached up without thinking. A nurse's instinct. She sees a wound, she moves toward it. I touched the cut at the edge of his forehead with the pad of my thumb. His hand caught my wrist, held it. He looked at me with an expression I had been watching build for weeks, piece by piece, layer by layer, behind every controlled silence and every deliberate distance. And for the first time, all at once, I saw it completed. He kissed me. It was not the kind of kiss that happens between two people fulfilling a contractual arrangement. It was not careful or measured or strategic. It was the kind of kiss that happens between people who have been fighting the same feeling for a long time and have finally exhausted every reason they had constructed to keep fighting it. I let him. I kissed him back. When we pulled apart, the kitchen was still half dark, and the city was still lit below us, and nothing in the world had changed except everything. He said, "This changes nothing about the contract." I said, "I know." We both knew it had changed everything. Then the kitchen light strengthened. The power was fully restored, and Marco walked in. He took in the scene, the proximity, the flush, the two of us stepping slightly apart, with the expression of a man cataloguing information he intends to use later. Then he smiled. The smile did not reach his eyes. He said, "Reyes called. He knows about the baby, and he's made an offer for the child's custody through a family court judge in Queens." He paused. "The judge has apparently already received his first payment." Dante went very still. I watched Marco smile, and I thought, He told Reyes himself. Not Dante. Marco. He was the one who told. The traitor inside. I am a fertility nurse. My entire professional life has been built around reading people in the most fragile moments they will ever experience. The ones who are holding hope together with both hands. The ones who are pretending to be okay and are not. The ones whose face says one thing and whose body says another. I am very good at the gap between what people say and what people mean. Marco was lying. About something. Possibly about many things. I could not prove it. Not yet. But I began to watch the way his phone disappeared when Dante entered a room, sliding into a pocket with a specific practice smoothness that had become invisible through repetition. The way he asked about the baby's due date with a precision that felt less like affection and more like scheduling. The way his eyes moved around a room when he first entered it. Not the way a man scans his home, but the way a man scans a space he is using. I went to Rosa. I found her in the garden level. The small terrace of real plants that she had insisted on as a condition of spending any time in the building. And I sat across from her and I told her what I had noticed. She went quiet. Not surprised quiet. The other kind. Then she said, I've been watching him for 6 months. I didn't want to believe it. 2 women, one young and new to this world, one old and fluent in it, both seeing what the most powerful man in the building could not see, because he had spent 15 years protecting himself from everything except the one thing that lived inside the house with him. His blind spot was the shape of a brother. Rosa gave me the key. She did not come with me. She said, whatever you find, I need it to be you who finds it. Not me. It has to be someone he will believe when everything is aligned against believing it. Marco's building was 12 blocks away. I went during a window I had identified, a regular Thursday meeting that Marco had not missed once in the 8 weeks I had been tracking his schedule. The office was organized in the way that obsessive people organize spaces, a system on top of a system, layers of order that were really layers of concealment. I worked methodically. Drawers, files, the locked cabinet I opened with the secondary key Rosa had placed alongside the first. Communication records, Reyes's organization, payment transfers, large amounts, irregularly timed, coded under shell names I recognized from the financial press coverage of Caruso business dealings. Meeting records going back 4 years. And then the photographs. I should not have clicked on the folder. I knew what it was likely to contain. I clicked anyway because I needed to know. Because incomplete evidence is not evidence. Because the thing Rosa had been watching for 6 months needed to be complete before I brought it to the only person it could destroy. Dante's first wife. Her name was Sophia. I knew this because Rosa had told me once, briefly, in the way Rosa said things she wanted you to have but didn't want to fully relive. The photographs were dated. They were taken from a specific vantage point, a building across from the restaurant where she had dinner. The car she got into. The route. They were taken from Marco's own position. He hadn't just told Reyes where she would be. He had been there. He had watched. He had documented it. I copied everything onto the drive Rosa had given me. I stood up, and the front door opened. Marco. Home early. His keys in his hand. I was still behind his desk. The drive was in my pocket. He was between me and the door, and the expression that crossed his face when he saw me was not anger. It was something colder, something that had been waiting for exactly this. Everything fractures. He took my phone first. Calmly, the way you take something from a person when you have already decided the conversation that follows and you are simply removing variables. Then he sat down across from me. He did not yell. He did not threaten in the obvious ways. He explained. He had always been the better strategist, he said. The problem was that Dante got to be the name. Dante got to be the face. Dante got to run the thing that Marco had helped build, had helped protect, had bled for. And what Marco had received in return was a supporting role in his brother's story. He wanted me to leave, tonight. There were termination papers already prepared, contract dissolution, settlement figure, full NDA enforcement. He wanted me to take them, sign them, and be gone before morning. He said, Dante will let you go. He'll be hurt, but he'll survive. That's generous of me. I said, and if I don't? He considered me with the patience of someone who has already considered all the outcomes. Then he said, "Then I give Reyes the address of the prenatal clinic and your next appointment time. And Dante gets to watch history repeat." I sat very still. I thought about Sophia, about the photographs in that folder, about the specific, deliberate cruelty of a man who had watched his brother lose everything once and had designed the mechanism to make it happen again. I took the papers. I packed quickly. The things that were mine. My mother's photograph, my books, the clothes I had arrived with. I left everything else. It was not mine. I wrote the note. It was all I could write without saying the things I couldn't say and still protect him from knowing what I knew. "I'm sorry. The contract is over." I picked up the bag. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button, and Rosa stepped out of the alcove beside the stairwell. She had been waiting. For how long, I don't know. She was wearing her coat, which meant she had been somewhere and come back, and her face had the expression of a woman who has seen this moment coming and positioned herself accordingly. She said, "You found something." I said, "Yes." She said, "And he threatened the baby." I said, "Yes." She looked at the bag in my hand. She looked at the elevator button still lit. She shook her head once, not negatively, not angrily, the way you shake your head when the situation has outgrown the available options and you are redirecting to a better one. She said, "Then you're not leaving. You're setting a trap." I set the bag down. I looked at Rosa. I said, "Tell me who Catherine is, the woman from the gala." Rosa's expression shifted. Something satisfied moved across her face. Upstairs, Dante found the note, half written, abandoned on the counter. He read it once, read it again. Then he folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, over his heart. He walked to Marco's room. He did not knock. The confrontation. Dante had suspected. I know this now. Rosa told me later that he had suspected for years, that there were gaps in the timeline of Sophia's death that never fully closed, questions that surfaced in unguarded moments and were immediately, deliberately submerged. Because Marco was his blood, his brother. The last person left from before everything broke. And the mind will protect what the heart cannot afford to lose, even when the protection is a lie, even when the lie is killing you slowly. He walked into Marco's room without knocking, and Marco was there, jacket still on, not yet seated, in the posture of a man who had been expecting this visit for some time. Marco did not deny it. He justified it. He talked about Sophia as if she had been a variable he had correctly identified. He talked about her pregnancy as a threat to the family's operational security. He talked about Reyes as a business partner rather than an enemy. He talked about me with the same clinical language. He said, "She's the same liability, a woman who knows too much and means too much. You can see it happening, Dante. You're already compromised." Dante was silent. This was not the silence of a man who had nothing to say. This was the silence of a man choosing in real time what remains of the person he has been for the past 15 years. The control, the precision, the ice, all of it built on the grief of what happened to Sophia, and all of it now revealed to have been built on the very man who made Sophia happen. Marco talked for another 2 minutes. Dante did not move. He did not speak. He did not give Marco the rage he had been bracing for. He just listened to every word with all the stillness in his body until Marco ran out of justifications. Everything we know about this man, the control, the precision, the inability to be moved, we now understand was a man who learned the only way to survive grief is to never show it. His silence here is the loudest thing he has ever said. It is 15 years of love turned inside out. It is a brother who built a fortress out of loss and discovered that the enemy had been inside the whole time. Catherine was exactly who Rosa had known she would be. Catherine Hale, federal prosecutor, 2-year investigation into the Reyes organization. A woman who had been building a case from the outside that Marco's betrayal had just handed her from the inside. I sat across from her in a conference room, and I put the drive on the table between us. She looked at it. She looked at me. I told her what was on it. She said, "What do you want in exchange?" I said, "Federal protection for me and the baby, tonight. And I need Reyes neutralized before he finds out what Marco is about to face." She picked up the drive. She said, "I need 40 minutes to review this. I said, "You have 30. She is trading the man she loves for the child's safety. She believes Dante will never forgive her for going to federal authorities. She does not know yet that he already knows. That while she was here, he was in Marco's room, and the whole structure was already fracturing from inside. She does it anyway. That is love as action, not as feeling." 22 minutes later, Catherine's phone rang. She listened for 4 seconds. Her face went still. She looked at me. She said, "There's been a shooting at the Caruso building. Your husband is alive. Marco is in custody." She stood up. "But Reyes got inside during the chaos. We need to go right now." The impossible choice. Dante had been shot in the shoulder. He was still standing. This did not surprise me later, when I thought about it. A man who had spent 15 years converting grief into structure, who had built an empire out of controlled damage, was not going to be stopped by a single bullet in the shoulder. He would stay upright through sheer refusal to do otherwise. Reyes had 3 men inside. He had used the chaos of Marco's arrest, the gaps in the security rotation, the distraction of the confrontation, to move. He had Rosa. I arrived with the federal team and walked into the main room, and there she was, standing very straight, very still, with the posture of a woman who refuses to be a convincing hostage, and beside her, across the room, was Dante. He saw me. Something moved through his face. Reyes spoke. He said, "The woman and the baby walk out with me. Rosa goes home. Simple." Dante said one word, no, one word, absolute word. The word of a man for whom this answer requires no consideration. I stepped forward. I said, "Yes." Dante's head turned. The look on his face was everything he had refused to show for months, compressed into a single second. Fear, not for himself, for me. He said, "Absolutely not." I said, "I'm not asking permission." I moved toward Reyes. Dante's hand closed around my arm. I stopped. I looked at him. I held his eyes, and I watched him in real time, at significant personal cost, against every survival instinct he possessed. Let go. He doesn't save her. He trusts her. After everything, after 15 years of control, after Sophia, after the fortress he built to make sure nothing could reach him again, he opens his hand. That is the most romantic thing this man has ever done, and the most terrifying. I walked toward Reyes. I put my hand in my pocket and found what Rosa had pressed into it before I'd left. A small device, a trigger, the kind of thing you only know about if you have spent 74 years in a world where such things are necessary. I got close enough. I dropped it. The federal team breached from both sides. 3 seconds of chaos, noise, controlled destruction. Reyes was down. Rosa was free. And then the room tilted. Or I did. And the floor came up, and the last thing I heard before everything went quiet was Dante's voice saying my name in a way I had never heard him say anything. After the storm. I woke up in stages. The light first. That specific hospital light that is always slightly wrong, too neutral, designed for function rather than comfort. Then the sounds, the monitors, the distant corridor, the particular quiet of a room that has been made quiet deliberately. Then, the hand. Dante's hand around mine from the chair beside the bed. He was asleep, shoulder bandaged, jacket gone, shirt untucked, the careful architecture of his appearance dismantled by the night. His hand around mine in the way of someone who had reached for it and then couldn't let go. I watched him sleep. I watched him for a long time. This man, this impossible, maddening, devastatingly human man who had built a fortress out of loss and spent 15 years maintaining it and had still, somehow, found his way to a hallway chair and a hospital bedside. The baby moved, slow and even, the way they move when they are simply present and accounted for. Dante's eyes opened. I said, "You came." He said, "I never left." A pause. Both of us knowing the weight of those words. I said, "The contract ended." He said, "I know." I tore it up. I said, "Then why are you here?" He looked at me. All of it visible now. Everything he had managed so carefully. Everything the fortress was designed to conceal. He said, "Because I want to be." He is not here because of obligation. Not because of the baby. Not because of the family name. Not because of a contract that no longer exists. He is here because of her. That distinction is everything. Rosa conveniently found somewhere else to be, which I would later understand was a gift she had decided to give us. We talked for a long time. He apologized for the contract, not for the terms, he said, but for the way it was offered, as an ultimatum, as the only available language he had for something he didn't yet have a better word for the coldness that came after, which was not indifference but its exact opposite. I apologized for Catherine, for not telling him before I moved, for going around him, which he understood, I think, because he understood the calculation I had made, and he understood it because he would have made the same one. He told me about Sophia, all of it, the version he had never told anyone, not Rosa, not his lawyers, not the people who rebuilt his life around the absence of her. I understood now why he had built what he had built, not cruelty, scar tissue over a wound that had never been allowed to close because the man who made the wound was eating dinner across from him 3 times a week. I told him I was in love with him. I said, I need you to know that, even if you can't say it back. I need it said out loud in a room where it can exist without a contract attached to it. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I started to prepare myself for the answer. Then he said, I have spent 15 years making sure nothing could touch me. You walked into that restaurant terrified out of your mind and you slid the contract back across the table. I have never admired anything as much as I admired that moment. I think I started falling then. I just had too much to lose to admit it. I did not cry. I wanted to. But I also wanted to stay completely present in it, in the specific, irreplaceable reality of sitting in a hospital room with his hand in mine while he said the truest thing he had ever said to another person. I stayed present. The new contract. 3 months later, Sunday, the smell of something good, the argument about gravy that I had been losing every Sunday for 8 weeks. I was enormous. Radiant, Rosa said, which I chose to believe because it was kind and because she meant it. Rosa said, more basil. I said, Rosa, there's already an entire plant's worth of basil in this. She said, more basil, Ellie? I added more basil. Dante was in the doorway. I could not see him, but I had developed, over the preceding months, a specific awareness of where he was in any given room, the way you develop awareness of things that have become essential. Rosa could see him. She caught him watching me with that expression, the one he had stopped entirely failing to hide, and she pointed at him without turning around. She said, stop watching her like you're afraid she'll disappear and go talk to her. He said, I don't know what to say. She said, that's the most honest thing you've said in 30 years. She handed me the wooden spoon, said something about needing to check the garden, and was gone before either of us could object. He stood across the island from me. He was not a man who fidgeted, but he was doing something with his hands. A slight movement, unconscious, the way people move when the thing they are about to say is the most important thing they have said in a very long time. He said, the contract is gone. I said, I know. He said, I want a new one. I set down the wooden spoon. He said, not because of the baby, not because of the family or the name or any of the reasons I had the first time. I want a new one because waking up in that hospital chair was the first time in 15 years I woke up and didn't want to be somewhere else. He took my hand, this man who had not touched anything voluntarily for 15 years, who had built a life around not needing. I said, that is the least romantic proposal in history. He said, is that a no? I said, it's a yes, obviously, you impossible man. Rosa came back from the garden exactly 90 seconds later. She looked at the two of us. She looked at his hand still holding mine. She said nothing. She just picked up the wooden spoon, tasted the gravy, nodded once in approval, whether about the gravy or the situation I was never entirely certain, and went back to stirring. He arrived on a Saturday, just before midnight, in the middle of a rainstorm that Rosa took as a good omen, because she took most things as good omens. He was 6 pounds 11 ounces. He had Dante's jaw and my eyes, and the specific, extraordinary fury of a person who has just been born into a world that has the audacity to be cold and bright and loud and real. Dante held him. I watched Dante hold him, and there it was again, that fracturing of the face, that dissolution of the architecture, The thing that happened the first time the baby kicked and had never quite stopped happening since. A man who had spent 15 years ensuring nothing could reach him, being reached. Rosa took my hand. We watched him for a long time. Then his phone buzzed. He read it. His expression shifted. Not to fear, to focus. That precise, calibrated alertness that was the true face of the man who ran what he ran. I said, "What is it?" He said, "Reyes has allies we didn't know about. Someone inside the federal case." He looked up. I said, "Then we deal with it." He looked at me. He said, "We?" I said, "We?" He nodded once, handed the baby gently back to me with both hands, careful in the way he was careful with exactly two things in his life. He walked to the window. New York was below us. Their city now. The city of every decision that had brought them to this room, this moment, this child. He stood at the glass and looked at it with the expression of a man who has finally decided what he is fighting for. He said quietly to the window, "Then it begins again." I looked down at my son. I was not afraid. I was ready. There is a version of my life where none of this happened. I have thought about her sometimes. That woman. The one who received a different file, who carried her child in her sensible apartment with her planned life and her reasonable future. I have thought about how much simpler her life was, how unencumbered. I do not envy her. I did everything right, and it led me here, into the wrong file, into the wrong name, into a restaurant where a man with stone hands slid a contract across a table and waited for me to fold. I didn't fold. He noticed. The contract was never about obligation. Looking back, and I have the benefit of looking back now with my son's weight in my arms and his father's hand in mine, I understand that the contract was what two people built when they needed an excuse to stay long enough to be seen. He saw me. I saw him. The rest, the danger, the betrayal, the fire it all had to pass through, the rest was just the price. Worth it, obviously. You impossible man.